Hello, my name is Reverend Thomas Coughlin. I was born deaf, as well as my parents and my grandparents. They were all deaf. I grew up in New York. I was born in a small house near Maloney. I have 3 younger sisters. They're all hearing. The 2 youngest are now working interpreters. And my middle sister, she married a deaf man. And they had a baby girl. Everything is good. I went to school in Rochester, New York. You know, they use finger spelling every day. Rochester method. I went there until I was 12. And then my parents wanted me to go to a camp near Buffalo, New York. So for 2 weeks, it was a camp run by the nuns. And my parents, they had a meeting with the nuns to talk about this school. And the nuns told my parents that your son should go to the St. Mary's School for the Deaf in Buffalo, New York. My parents thought, okay, it's a good school. It's a good Catholic school. They will understand religion and culture. It'll be very good for your son. All right. So when I was 12, I transferred to that school for about 8 years. And the situation in that school was different. I learned a lot about religion. The nuns worked with me every single day. And they said that church was very important. It was important to be steadfast in prayer. And when I was 16 years old, I became more interested in religion. And then one day, the nuns were teaching me about the Bible. And we read a story about a man who became Catholic. And he became a monk for 30 or 40 years, and then he died. And he traveled the world. That was his life. So I read this story. I was about 16. And the story, I was just completely enamored with it. The story about this monk completely changed my life. And so I asked the nuns for more literature about this, and I kept reading in this idea about these monks, and about this monk and this work was just completely fascinating to me. I just couldn't get enough of it. So when I graduated high school, I wasn't sure what to do, and my parents wanted me to go to Gallaudet. I thought, well, I wasn't really sure, and so maybe I thought, well, maybe I could become a priest or a nun, but I was told, no, you're deaf, you can't. And my deafness always seemed to be a problem, and people were concerned about my being able to communicate, and if you're a priest, you can't talk, how can you pray? Communication is such an important thing, and if you're deaf, this would really hinder that. But that isn't what I wanted to do. All of my experiences and all my readings just really had really made a big impression on me, so I wanted to do something else. So I wrote a letter to different places, to different schools. I sent them out, and no one would accept me because I was deaf. And they all wanted hearing people. So I'd send out more letters, and no one would accept me in. And I thought, all right, well, the world already has enough hearing people. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to write one more letter, and I'm not going to say I'm deaf. I didn't put that down at all. I'm just going to say that I'm a normal high school student and see my response. And the school did not know that I was deaf. So for maybe 2 or 3 months, we communicated. And we talked about the church, and they wanted to know about my background info, my school, all that typical information. And now I was stuck because I had attended the St. Mary's School for the Deaf. And as that word, deaf, I knew that as soon as they saw that word deaf, they wouldn't accept me. But I had to do what I had to do, so I put that on there. I sent all my information, and I just put it in there. And that word, deaf, they must have completely just overlooked that word, so I went ahead and said it. And 1 week later, I got my response, and it said, "We didn't know that you were deaf. We had no clue. They were shocked. They'd never accepted a deaf person before. Even that communication was going to be hard. And I read this. But the last line said, the last line wanted to know about your background, your communication, if you could communicate. So there was a lot of back and forth. A lot of back and forth. So I asked them what to do, and I was to fly. They wanted to meet me in person, so I flew. And at that time, I had never been involved with hearing people without an interpreter before. It was 1967, so any interpreters, anything, this was a new experience for me. So I flew, and I arrived. The priest came in to greet me, and he wanted to know if I could read his lips. So I sat down when we were talking, and I was able to read his lips. So he told me to go in and to sit down on the desk, and he introduced me to a boy. We shook hands, we met each other, gave the first introductions. The first question he asked me was an odd question. I thought maybe he had said something else, but he didn't. He asked me how tall I was. And I thought, how weird is that I flew all this way here for you to ask me? And I responded 5'10". And he was shocked. He couldn't believe that I understood him. He didn't know that deaf people could communicate. He didn't realize that I could read lips and communication could happen. And the preacher was stunned because we didn't know that deaf people could talk or communicate. And there was another question. How old are you? I'm 21. The preacher was completely shocked, and he was amused for a long time. He was worried about me as a deaf person. When he saw that I was deaf, he couldn't figure out how I was going to communicate with other people. He wanted to accept me, but he was worried about my deafness being a problem. It was decided that we both felt nervous. So for 1 hour, a discussion continued, different questions back and forth about deaf people. So it was good for us to have those kinds. It was good for us to have an hour to have that discussion where we could really learn about each other. It was a problem that I didn't have an interpreter, so I flew back to school for 1 month, and I finally got my letter of acceptance to the school. And that was exciting as it was also a little bit of a challenge. So I had been in the St. Mary's School for the Deaf family, deaf culture. That's everything that I knew. When I graduated, I was going to go into the hearing world, which is not a world that I'm familiar with. But I went to the school. I fought against any challenge, any problem I faced, and I always tried to help. I always tried my best to figure out any problem. Even if that meant reading lips, communication, whatever way I could do this. First night in the seminary, I started to cry because my friends, everything, all my relationships were instantly cut off. The purpose of seminary is for the boy to become a priest, so that first night of no communication was just hard for me to deal with. When people would look at me and ask me my name, I didn't know how to speak, so I just tell them my name, and they would just kind of look at me like I was weird, and they weren't really sure about it, and that made me embarrassed. So if someone would understand me, I had to think of a way that we could understand. But no matter what, I just kept going. And later the boy, who could kind of read my lips, we practiced. He learned the ABCs, signed, we worked together, and then slowly my friends began to learn how to communicate. And that was really my first challenge in the hearing world. One of them. When I was in high school, I remember my goal being seminary. When I entered seminary, Gallaudet had a Bachelor's of Arts program. And you could go in seminary for five years. So you could go to you could study different majors, psychology, religion. There were other majors that you could study at Gallaudet. And I had my interpreter with me. That was very important. It's a very important part to help me along with my test so that I could pass everything. My first test was a very low score, and I wasn't sure what the problem was. And seminary school was just a whole different way of learning language and culture and philosophy, and it was things that I wasn't very sure of, and this low test score just really made me sad. And the interpreter thought it was his fault, and I said no, it's my fault. So I had to figure out ways that I could do better. How could I fix this? And I wanted to try again. So we threw that test out and we tried again. So for 2 weeks I studied. I took the test again, and this time I passed with a C. Okay, I have to study harder, but that's okay. I know I can do it. So every time I would study, I'd pass, but I realized I had to study harder. And I realized how much communication that I was missing, and it was important that I focused and that I kept up and that I was paying attention. 4 years, I finally passed. Finally. Completely shocked. I was completely shocked that I passed. There were 32 other students that were taking their master's test. Only 7 of us passed, and I was one of the ones that passed. And I passed, and I was able to get my diploma. And some of the hearing people failed. And they didn't know why, and they hadn't studied hard enough. First, you have to study hard. That's the key to success. Studying. The second way to make sure that you succeed is to make sure that you read your materials, everything you're given, read it, digest it, understand it. That's really the key to success for life. Anything is possible in life if you study and you work at it. So I got my master's degree so I could become a Catholic priest. And the first person I met was in Russia. The first had been a Russian. I was completely shocked by this. I didn't realize that there were other priests around the world. And I was asked to work for the International Deaf Association for 4 years. At workshops, meetings, so for 4 years I did all that. 4 years in the international world. Japan, the Philippines, India, South Korea, Malaysia, and just places all over the world. Different, meeting different deaf people. And I was looking for the stories about their life. So I took on all the knowledge that I had met from different people, all the deaf people, all their stories, and I really looked at how they succeeded, and I internalized all that information. And every person, their story was different, their struggles, their success. And I heard everything from I can do it to I give up. And I always thought, keep trying. It's important that you don't give up. You can never give up. So now for 30 years, it's really hard to explain how time flies and how it goes by so quickly. But it does. So now for 34 years, I've helped develop. So now, 34 years later, I've developed a program in New York, and I moved back But the culture here is different. The Chinese people, they have different cultures, they have different languages, and it's interesting. So for 3 years, I also set up a camp for deaf kids in New York. The camp itself needed so much money for fundraising, so we were able to get $75,000 to help the camp so that it could carry on. We could set that up. So for 3 years that program has been going on, or for 3 months that program has been going on. And so now there's a nurse required to help. There's a nurse that's required to be at the camp. So looking for that is hard. Looking for a nurse is hard because I'm a doctor myself. Excuse me, I'm a priest myself. So now all this stuff of deaf can't, I'm seeing this all over again, and that's really interesting to me. And it's important that when we sit down, we talk about it. Communication, you can read lips, you can talk, there's an interpreter to help you. It's hard, but it's more of a problem of the attitude than really of the communication itself. Excuse me. The attitude of refusing to cooperate or work with anyone really isn't helping anybody. So now we have a nurse. So now we have a nursing program that's easy. We have a deaf nurse, so it's easier to communicate with patients now. So sometimes they can hear a little bit better, sometimes the interpreter can help. Now the world of medicine is completely different than it was before. So you have to know a lot of vocabulary words, a lot of very specific words. You also have to have a background in medicine to study all the new drugs. So now there's different ways to avoid challenges. You also have to have your license. So now there are 2 majors. You can be a nurse, and there's another one. If I had to do my life all over again, I would become a priest, but maybe also become a doctor too. If I was a young boy, I think now I would choose to become a doctor. Maybe go into and also religion is always still and always has been interesting to me. And it's something that I really can't answer very well, but it's something that just always had inside, and I think it's important for deaf people to keep fighting and to keep going no matter what it is. And everything you do is hard. If you choose religion, it's hard. If you choose medicine, it's hard. And what do you want inside? You just have to do it. You also have to know your limits. Some things, like becoming a pilot, deaf people can't hear, and there are limitations, and that's acceptable, but at the same time, don't let people oppress you. Don't let people just say, deaf can't try. It's easy to give up and to believe that attitude, but you have to keep going. Many deaf people all over the world that I've met, they have low self-esteem. And they have been taught to believe themselves that they can't do anything for themselves. I can't do anything, it's fine, it's no big deal. But no, that isn't what we're here to do. You should be open. Jesus healed people, Jesus helped people. So all over again, the world, you see all these people who can do. He told the man who couldn't walk to get up and deaf. He told everyone who couldn't to go and do something. He wants deaf people to be open. He wants hearing people also to be open too. Open your mind, open your heart. When people graduate, they see all these problems and they shut themselves in a box. And they don't do anything and they limit themselves and they shut themselves off. When really, Be open to the world. Be open to new experiences. That's what Jesus wanted us to do. That's what his command was. And if you close yourself off from the world, the challenge that you have, that you and I have, both as hearing people and as deaf people, everybody has. Thank you.